Hello, everyone, and welcome to OpenObservability Talks. And today, joining forces with OpenSearch community. I'm Dotan Horvitz. I'm a developer advocate at logs.io. And OpenObservability Talks, if you're new here, is a podcast and a live stream where we talk about anything DevOps, observability, and open source. Each episode, we talk with experts from the community, and at the end, we'll have some news and industry updates. For those joining on the live stream on YouTube or Twitch, feel free to share questions or comments on the chat, whether Twitch or YouTube, and we'll try to get to those after our chat. I'd like to thank our sponsors, logs.io, for backing the podcast. If you have something interesting to share, reach out and suggest your topic. You can do that on the webpage openobservability.io, or on Twitch at OpenObserve, or directly to me at Horvitz, whichever way is comfortable for you. We're more than happy to have some more people from the community participating on the podcast. And with that, let's move on to today's episode. And today I have a topic that's I'm really excited about, near and dear to my heart. The new OpenSearch open source project. Several of my colleagues are already contributing there and playing with it, so really exciting. And there's no better person to talk to about that than my guest today, Kyle Davis. Kyle is a senior developer advocate for OpenSearch at AWS. And let's add Kyle to the stream. Hey, Kyle.
Hey, everybody. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Great to have you here. And Kyle, maybe let's start with a few words from you, introducing you and maybe also your capacity these days.
Yeah, sure. Like the Tan had said, my name's Kyle Davis. I'm a senior developer advocate for OpenSearch at AWS. I've been doing developer advocacy for a while now. I was head of developer advocacy at Redis Labs previous to this, and I've been involved with data and databases and software development for most of my life. And I have to say, if I wasn't paid to do this stuff, I would probably be doing it anyway, which is stupid for me to say, because I'm sure people who might potentially pay my paycheck or hire me later in my career will be listening to this and say, oh, well, we don't have to pay this guy. But I live in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and I will apologize. There's probably some outside noise. It's the first day that it's actually warm here. It's 11 degrees Celsius, which is warm for us. Yeah, but in my spare time, when I'm not tinkering with software or databases or data stores, I'm gardening or tinkering with electronics. I'm in 3D printing and stuff like that. So just an all-around geek.
Great, and actually related to today being intimately involved with OpenSearch, that's actually very exciting. We at Logs.io follow that from the very beginning, the big bang when back when Elastic decided to relicense Elasticsearch and Kibana and essentially closed source them. Actually, for those following the podcast, you probably remember the episode we had back in January, exactly talking about that. Like I called it, put the open in open source, in observability, because that's essentially was a crisis for the community. And even back then, not knowing that will ultimately shape up as OpenSearch, we already started discussing with many in the community around forking Elasticsearch and Kibana to let them carry on as community initiatives and Apache 2 open activities. So maybe interesting to hear about the current open source, how it kicked off, how the team shaped up to be. If you can share that with us.
Yeah, so it's actually kind of a funny story. So previous to being the developer advocate for OpenSearch, I was the developer advocate for Open Distro for Elasticsearch, which we'll probably maybe talk about a little later. But that was something Amazon had worked on, which is a collection of plugins and tools, and that used open source Elasticsearch and Kibana So it wasn't a fork or anything like that, but it was just like something that you could add on to it to round out your feature set and give you a deployable that was straightforward. And so I work a few hours ahead of most of my colleagues because where my time zone is and just my working hours. So a lot of them are in Pacific time zone. I'm a different time zone. And so I had a couple hours one morning in January, and then we had my first meeting was kind of in the middle of the day, and one of my colleagues was basically like, we were talking about something kind of mundane for Open Distro, and we are just saying like, oh, our next release will be 1.12 or whatever it was. And one of my colleagues was like, I don't want to talk about this. I want to talk about this, and pasted a link to the blog post where Elastic said that they were, and I want to be fair. I mean, it's not really closed source. It's just proprietary, right? It's not open source. Where they were taking it to the SSPL and Elastic license and all that stuff. And I was like, well, it's been a good run. It looks like I'll be reassigned to some other project. And after that meeting, I got called into another meeting, and I was kind of, I was like, well, what are we doing, folks? I mean, am I going to work for like sorting packages for Amazon Prime or something? I didn't know what was going to be my next role. And I said, no, this is not something where it's necessarily, a thing that's going to end, right? And there had never been a situation where we were like seriously considering, forking Elasticsearch. It was certainly hard to do something like Open Distro when another organization would just kind of drop a new version, and we'd have to scramble to make our plugins work and all sorts of things like that. There's a lot of talks for that kind of first week, and there was a pretty good delay, right? Like I think between when we announced that we were doing this and when the announcement of Elasticsearch no longer being Apache 2 was, I think, at least 2 weeks, maybe 3. But in that time, it became clear that it made the most sense to carry forward with Apache 2 and take 7.10.2 of Elasticsearch and Kibana and
which is
try to make sure that there was an opportunity.
Version, just for our audience, that's the latest version that was under Apache 2 before they switched to the SSPL and Elastic license.
Right. And so at that point, we started thinking, what is this going to take? And we started, talking to people in who might have similar points of view, people that have worked with Open Distro, or people like Logs who are also providing Elasticsearch as part of their services, and just trying to figure out what it was going to look like. And that was hard. I mean, we had some idea based on running our service, what the code base looked like, right? And what would be required here. But it's a big code base, and it was basically, we quickly got support inside Amazon to do this. The thing that we were kind of realizing in the days after was this is kind of like, building something from scratch, really, as far as what would be needed to support it. The number of developers, the number of product managers, and all this stuff. Even if we were to hire as fast as possible, would just still be something that we were going to have to do with what we had while we built more and more people and more structures around it. So that was pretty stressful. And then just kind of realizing, there was also a lot of debate on how it would look. Would it be something where, AWS would just kind of create something, or would it be a true community-driven and a project that would be destined for kind of a shared governance? And ultimately, that's kind of what we decided that was what was right for customers of AWS and for users of what would become OpenSearch.
Yeah, and definitely we're going to talk about that also today. So this journey led us to today, and really exciting to see just a couple of weeks ago that we released the beta 1.0. It was forked off, as you said, the Elasticsearch and Kibana 7.10.2, which is, again, the latest version that was still under the Apache 2 license of Elasticsearch and Kibana. And we have downloadable artifacts, so people can actually take Linux stars or Docker images and have an easier way compared to the alpha, let's say, that to start off with that. So maybe if you can just summarize what's been achieved so far now to this point of the beta.
Yeah, that's a good question. So as you mentioned, the alpha was released a few months, I guess more than a month ago now, and the beta's been a couple weeks out. And when we started looking at kind of how we would think about this, but the alpha was basically just, let's do a couple things. One, introduce the name and have something that someone could feasibly compile. And then the beta was where we were kind of basically inviting folks in to say, try it out and tell us what's going on with it. Does it work? Does it not work? And it's been really illustrative of, what the differences are. Now, the process getting there, maybe we'll talk about this a little bit later, but there was a long process getting there because it wasn't just a matter of, clicking the fork button on GitHub. And I think that's what some people are like, well, it's taking you so long, just click the fork button. And there was particular complications in this project having to do with licensing and things like that. But the alpha basically provides you that kind of basic level of, you could run Gradle assemble and you could, run the build scripts for, OpenSearch dashboards. And by the way, I probably should just preface this for those who aren't following along. OpenSearch is the replacement for Elasticsearch, but also the name of the project in itself. And then OpenSearch Dashboards is the replacement or the new name for the Kibana fork. So having those available in the alpha were things that would take a while. And frankly, I did a presentation at a conference and I had to use the alpha, and I spent all weekend getting it where it would run. It was definitely one of those things where you felt like you're walking into someone's mechanic shop and trying to assemble a car, right? Where the beta was basically, here's a car you can go drive around, and it may rattle and it may, the knob for the radio may fall off, but it's still a car, right? Something that you can identify as software versus source code. And some of the biggest challenges we've had has been figuring out the right structures to put together the software, because there is a lot of moving parts, right? One of the things I do want to focus on a little bit is kind of the construction of this, because OpenSearch project encompasses, like I said, OpenSearch and OpenSearch Dashboard, but as well as all those kind of additional plugins and tools that were with Distro. So those would be things.
Point, sorry to interrupt, just maybe not all our audience knows, and you did mention that before, but just to set the stage of what Distro is, and maybe also now that you're talking about OpenSearch, how this fits in.
Yeah, sure. So Distro, like I said, was a collection of plugins and tools, and an installer for open source Elasticsearch. So when you would download and start running Distro for Elasticsearch, it would basically take those artifacts and then start providing configuration on top of it, and then a series of plugins that would do things like security, anomaly detection. So those are two kind of like very different things. So like the security would provide you like SSL and or TSL and PLS, whatever it is. And things like ability to log in and user management, and then fine-grained access control. But also things like index management and a lot of these things that are kind of like common alerting, things that you'd really want to use with Elasticsearch. But then anomaly detection is this kind of AI-based tool to detect anomalies based on random cut forests. So it had a whole range of features. Many of those are things most people probably want to use. Like you can use, certainly, you could have used Elasticsearch by itself, and many people do, but oftentimes people found that it was there's a lot of things that just weren't there, and maybe that was the motion from Elastic to provide those other plugins or whatever. But OpenDistro provided a set of free Apache 2.0 plugins that would fill a lot of those gaps in. From AWS perspective, that what was the basis for Amazon Elasticsearch Service, AES. So that was also there, and we had a lot of people in the community that were running it at larger organizations, things like that. So OpenDistro plus the 2 forked pieces of code is the OpenSearch project, and the beta included, the alpha was just OpenSearch and OpenSearch dashboards, and the beta included OpenSearch dashboards and all the plugins as well. So those things kind of was the first time you could actually do something that was similar to what most people would run in production, right? It was very different, and getting those pieces to work together is actually an interesting process. Like I never, until this project, found build sequences or build scripts very interesting, but I understand the complexities of such a large project, and with all these moving parts working together, and if you make one change here, how do you test everything else? So I have a lot of respect for those folks on our we call them infra team that build all the automation for us, because that's the real lifeblood that'll make this project move forward for the long term, is all that automation.
That's for sure, and I can also testify from seeing the amount of effort also on the peripherals that people don't tend to pay attention to, like the technical documentation and all sorts of build processes, as you mentioned, and others that definitely, looking from the side at least, it didn't look like a trivial task at all, and gladly now, again, it's a beta now, and another big news that was just published is that finally we have a formal roadmap that we can show the community. Maybe I can also share it on the screen to those that are viewing us. Essentially, it's really exciting, and you're now able to see essentially everything that is up and coming. Of course, it's proposed, and obviously it's a community discussion. But seeing, I guess, the most exciting part for me was to see RC1 in June 2nd. So like in a couple of days, we're going to have the RC, at least according to this schedule, and then seeing the GA plan, the 1.0, the 1.1, and with the relevant items. And as I said, it's having that as a community activity that people can actually take part in. This is really exciting for me in making things really concrete and also really visible and transparent. I'd be glad to hear from you. What's the way that we build? You mentioned what's alpha and what's beta. Maybe if you can tell us what's the meaning and the of RC in this context, and what should we expect of it, and the later stages, and also maybe the process around the contributing and taking part of the roadmap.
Yeah. So the next step would be an RC, and I think June 2nd would be great. Are we going to make June 2nd? It's possible. I think there is some optimism in that date from the things we want to accomplish, and I know some of the statuses of those. And the important thing to know about this roadmap is this is the roadmap. This is not like the outward-facing roadmap. There is no inward-facing and outward-facing. It is a single roadmap. So developers inside AWS that are working on this project are working from the same thing. There's of course discussions that are going on, internally, but that's mostly like, management discussions. Things like, how are we allocating folks to different things, and how we would, navigate getting, our OpenSearch into our service and stuff like that. That's normal. That wouldn't be things we would expose to the community. But when it comes to actually developing on it, we're working off of this roadmap as well. So RC is our release candidate stage. Right now, the plan is to do one release candidate. And release candidates have different definitions at different places. the way we've kind of framed alpha, beta, and release candidate, and finally GA, general availability, is alpha is untested and feature incomplete. Beta is untested and feature complete. RC is basically tested but not validated, and feature complete. And then GA is tested, validated, and feature complete. So the goal of OpenSearch 1.0 is to basically have minimal number of features different from the open source. So Elasticsearch 7.10.2 and Kibana 7.10.2. Those are the goals for that. So of course, there's not a whole lot of features there, but as we have seen, there's a few things that were just like kind of either low-hanging fruit that we could accomplish really easily without affecting anything else, or things that were needed to replace some missing functionality that was there. So that's where we're going with RC1. So RC1 should be pretty darn close to what GA will be, and hopefully we do find additional bugs. And I'm the funny thing is, internally, they're in testing phase for RC1. So in my mind, RC1 has already happened. So internally, all the plugin owners that were from Open Distro, things like security, are now testing on OpenSearch RC1, and we'll find things and we'll make small changes here and there between now and then. But if we do find things, it may push that date out, by days, not by weeks or anything. And then once we get validation from the community, from people who like logs, we hope that logs will take RC1 and then start trying to figure out how it's going to fit into their business. People will start trying to deploy it in their own environments, and seriously seeing where a more mature version of beta looks, and all the findings we have in beta have been fixed, with the exception of a few things that are still kind of pending. And then from there, we'll fix anything that we find in RC1, and it'll be GA for 1.0. One thing to look at on the roadmap, though, is what happens beyond 1.0. That's where things get really interesting, I think, from a project perspective. That's when we'll start putting things in that are additions. 2.0, we're using semantic versioning, so 2.0 will be where we'll be introducing any breaking changes. So you should see no breaking changes between OpenSearch and Elasticsearch 7.10.2 and Kibana 7.10.2, unless there was something that was completely unavoidable. But I can't think of anything off the top of my head that I'm aware of that would be a breaking change. So you should be able to run it. We're working on a few things like versioning and how that works for some external clients. So yeah. The other thing I want to mention about the roadmap is on the roadmap, there's a way for you to get things onto it, right? So that was something that was really important to me, working with the community and working with people outside of AWS. I said, we can't release in fact, I was the delay in getting the roadmap out for at least a few days, because I said, we can't get this out here without having a place for people and a process for people to get something onto this, because this is a community-driven project. So there is a FAQ item that gives you kind of an outline of the best way to contribute, and try to get something onto the roadmap. The best way to do that, of course, is say, hey, I'm willing myself to build all this code, and we'll work with you and find out where it fits and try to get it in a logical place on the roadmap. If you want to say, the funny thing is we've had this question a couple times in previous community meeting. We had somebody say, well, is there any plans to rewrite OpenSearch in Go or Rust? And I said, well, that's an idea. It's a challenging thing because we have to rewrite Lucene, which is the decades-old core that's not core, but I guess library that's in the middle of this. And if you were to say this and say, I want to get this on my roadmap, I think that would be a very high bar to get on the roadmap, because like, if you said I had 100 developers to put towards this, well, that's a talk. But if you just say I want somebody else to do it for me, that's a much bigger ask. So we really hope that people do start thinking about the project and how things get onto the roadmap. We're looking I think when you go from the 1.0 to 2.0, like that range, I think we're probably looking at things that will make people's lives better. Not huge, broad scoping features. I think that's where 2.0 comes in. And we have a whole group of people that will help the community kind of reason through where it comes. And we want to be realistic with people, right? Like, the priorities here are to get this out there running and start this kind of ability for us to deliver, when I say us, the entire community, deliver features at a regular pace, right? That being said, gigantic features are something that we're not opposed to those, but they'll probably be, not something we would put in 1.1. We're not going to switch OpenSearch to Golang in 1.1, for sure.
Yeah, that's one thing we can say for sure.
Yeah.
I think first of all, it's really exciting. But at Logs, we already installed the alpha and start playing with it. So definitely we're going to play with the beta and the RC. One thing is interesting. You mentioned a few times is by the way, if you're on the live stream, I did post also the both the link to GitHub with the so you can see both the OpenSearch project in general and also specifically the link to the roadmap, and also the blog post that details everything that Kyle said about how you can get involved, how you can post an FAQ, and all the details about that. So do look it up. And if you're on the listening the podcast, then I'll also post it as part of the podcast as well. And we have an interesting question from the audience. How many people are actively maintaining OpenSearch? And I would actually want to expand on this question because, again, we at Logs.io are proud to take part of this project, but interesting to learn who else, both in maintainers, in contributors, not just maintainers, but the broader community involved there, and of course, partner companies, all the whoever is involved. I'd be glad to hear about that.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think the easiest way to answer that question is if you actually look on our GitHub, you can actually see the people who are working on it. I think the number is 100 and some odd, 123 or something like that. That's a pretty accurate number. And that would be inclusive of people inside and outside. So those are contributors to the project. And so there's going to be some fluidity to that. So that might include, like, we've had people that have come and gone from the project, so they'll be just as normal stuff, right? Like we had 2 developers have taken jobs at different places inside AWS, right? Like so they'll be counted. Are they actively maintaining? So that's probably not, but you can see that, and we're working in the open here, so you can see all of our contributions to it. There is a, I wouldn't count these people as active maintainers of OpenSearch. There are people who are working on our control plane for our service, but they are frankly dwarfed by, everybody else who's working on it. External contributors, I think that if you were to look at it right now, it's a lot of AWS folks, and just to give people a context, before Alpha, which was just, a month or so ago, this project was something we talked about, but we didn't have the code out there. So there wasn't even an opportunity for folks to really contribute to it. So right now, I think for beta 1, we had a couple dozen people that we would say contributed to it. So that's a decent ratio. So there's that. And I actually see the chat coming through, 123 developers. Wow. That does include folks that are doing some very minor work. Like I'm counted in that, and I'm, the website, I'm maintaining the website, and I have contributed to OpenSearch personally, but that would be things like I wrote the contributing.md file or updated it. So it's not like 123 people committing 1,000 lines of code a day. But all those contributions count. And that number doesn't even include those who are providing contributions that are outside of GitHub. So we have a very broad definition of contribution. So those people who are actively participating in our forums, or that counts towards contribution in our mind, and that adds probably of the few dozen people who are external that work for Beta 1. That is probably adding half of those folks are people who have just commented and given us direction on things. So, but 123 people are people who've committed code, right? So it's in some way or another that could be marked down, but it probably is more like Java or whatever. So yeah,
the partners obviously that as a company decided to back this, not just individuals. That's I think worth mentioning as well. And not only Logs.io, we're not the only ones. Don't worry.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I'm sorry I missed that when I was answering your question here, Tom. We do have a number of partner organizations, and that's a project that's building up. So when we talk about partners, those are people who have indicated support, and when they indicate support, that means basically they're publishing about it, or have told us in some way, or a firm commitment to do so. So like we have Ivan, which is a Finnish company that does great work in the data space, and they have a lot of different services. They've been working with us. We have Bonsai Search, which if you have been around Elasticsearch for a long time, you will be familiar with Bonsai Search. They are just a phenomenal company that have an amazing kind of history with their projects. And they were the first people to get the alpha on a service.
I remember the tweet.
It was shocking. It was frankly shocking. They were like, "Hey, we got it running on our service," and internally at AWS, we looked around and like, we don't even have that going, and we've had this for a long time. So they're real smart folks there, and of course Logs. And I'm not saying this because I'm on a podcast sponsored by Logs, but I personally worked with folks at Logs and have been really impressed by the contribution and commitment to the project. I know there's a blog post that's kind of, we're waiting on the finishing touches on it, but Amitai Stern has just been working really hard on this and has written a very comprehensive guide to writing an OpenSearch plugin. And that's pending right now on the opensearch.org website. So you can read it now if you really want to know about it. It's all in the open to our website's open source as well. It's BSD3 licensed. It's the only part of the project that's not Apache 2 licensed. I think Apache 2 and BSD3, that's a good pairing. Like those are ones most people can agree with. There's not anything else in it. Yeah.
Sounds good. And do you have any interesting anecdotes from this forking process so far? You've done amazing work there, digging into, as you said, massive amounts of code, both in Elasticsearch and in Kibana, and trying in a very short period of time, converting it into OpenSearch, which is again cleaning and getting it in a good shape, purely Apache 2 and everything. Any interesting anecdotes from that experience?
That was a really interesting experience, and it was like turning over rocks and finding new things every day. For those who don't know, Elasticsearch and Kibana were kind of split up in the one repo. They contained mixed licenses, which made it extremely difficult to just, like what I talked about earlier, click that fork button. If you did that, you potentially had some risk of having things that you weren't allowed to do if you were to do that. So that was tricky. So it had the Elastic license built into it. So there's these things called XPack, and XPack plugins are not something that's freely available to the community as far as a license is concerned. They might be something you could download and use without cost, but you did not have the license to make modifications and have your own versions of those. I'm not an expert or a lawyer, so if you are interested in those things, please read those licenses and have your counsel read them, because that's always the tricky thing, right? Like, these things aren't made for humans to understand; they're made for courts to understand.
But it's not open source license, that's for sure.
It's not open source.
Is not open OSS license, not OSI approved in any way, shape, or form. So that's the bottom line.
That's the bottom line. That's the bottom line. And for those who don't know, OSI is the basically says what is open source and what's not. So that was a lot of like basically kind of pulling things apart. We had to just pull constantly those things out, and a lot of it was going line by line through code, which is just an extremely tedious process. And we kind of isolated those folks off, and they were working solely on that. And we had other people working on Open Distro, and we had a couple releases of Open Distro while we were doing this, which those two people, like, they didn't meet, basically. They were two divided groups. So we found a lot of things that were interesting. There were quite a bit of things in kind of the marketing stuff in it that we had to separate out. There were messages that would pop up if you were doing certain things that would say, try something here or whatever, that just weren't appropriate anymore. And then you get down into the branding, where that's actually really challenging, especially when you get to OpenSearch dashboards. There's a long-standing desire for people to say, look, I'm delivering this to my customer. They don't need to know that it's, Kibana if you were doing it before OpenSearch or OpenSearch dashboards. So trying to split all that out. And in fact, I'll give you this story. Right before we released beta, we were doing a bug bash, and we're basically sicking everybody on it and saying, what do we find here? And I was sitting there using SourceGraph, which is like a source code search engine. It's actually pretty neat, and finding instances of all these words, that would not be appropriate any longer, and removing those. Down to, if you've used Elasticsearch for a long time, there's like a tagline. It's like, for search in it, and that's actually a line from, or a derivative of a line from, I think, The Big Lebowski. And we're like, that's the sort of thing we have to remove. We were removing things, and they used, names of people that work for Elastic inside of it as like kind of like test words in the tests. We had to remove those. But the most insidious thing that we found, this is not bad, but right before beta 1, we realized that there was an Elastic logo that popped up for under 500 milliseconds at certain parts. We had one person who was like, I think I saw it. And we weren't delivering that logo in any way, but it was baked into EUI, which is a library that's called Elastic User Interface Library. It's baked into that. So it was the loading icon would come up in certain circumstances. So that was one of those things where we had to basically make that change at the last minute, restart the build processes, and do everything, because we had that one, which functionally was in a template. It was functionally like an HTML tag that we had to do. So there's this constant process of every time we turn around, turning over something and discovering another instance or another time that was there. There was telemetry that was collected. The build processes had to be thrown out entirely. So it was, a very methodical task. And we're in a much better place now. I think if you wanted to, we don't think we want to work with everybody. We hope people don't just fork, indiscriminately. If you wanted to, you could click that forking button and probably not be in peril. Like that's the thing that was so tedious in this last round, was just making sure that we were allowing that. And I think that's a really important open source freedom, is the ability to fork, right? Like if you don't agree with the direction of the project, a good project is one that there's no gotchas in that project, in that process of forking. I found it amazing, I have to admit. And we have a team that is well familiar with both Kibana and Elasticsearch, and still for me it was dazzling to understand how intermingled the open source and the proprietary code is, and how not open it is, in the sense of, as you said, being able to, okay, if you want to use the open source without
marrying the commercial part, you can just use the open source or fork it or do whatever. And I found it striking. So that was amazing to see. And in a way, as you said, I think one of the achievements, you don't see like a rich feature set on the version 1 of OpenSearch, but one thing that for me is main, and I hope that people don't miss out on this significant value, is that you actually have a version that is pure open source, the pure open source equivalent of what we loved in Elasticsearch and Kibana, but cleaned out of all this dial home baked in and the logos baked in and all sorts of, we had something about it using a backend service that suddenly was blocked, although it's part of the open source. Say if you open source it, then at least either disconnect it from a service or allow the service access. But so all sorts of things that are really I think we're in a better shape significantly around that. Another thing, I saw a post earlier this month from Wu Sheng from Apache Skywalking. He wrote an excellent blog post. I really liked it, showing their move from Elasticsearch to OpenSearch and as their storage, and how they made a very comprehensive evaluation of OpenSearch and why this is the right path forward for them specifically. Which for me was a good testament of someone else external evaluating OpenSearch. But I'm curious, do you have other feedback that you get out of the audience about usage, about maybe also influencing the roadmap, steering the community? What kind of signals do you get from the community?
Yeah, Skywalking was a surprise to us. It's not like they came to us and said, "Hey, let's do this." But I think this is something we're going to see more often. As projects look at the kind of dependencies or things that they are integrating into their own open source project, it becomes really a strange decision point to say, "Hey, let's use this thing that isn't open source in the open source project." So I think we'll see that happening more as people start integrating those things in. And I want to indicate as well, we're working on kind of a version, a set of artifacts, in fact, that would allow folks who just want like OpenSearch, nothing else, no plugins or anything else, for these kind of like embedding tasks. We're working on an artifact for that because frankly, most of our people that we had been in contact with were using it as a product, kind of here's the box, I use the box, and there it is, it goes forward. But the surprise to us was the number of folks that were really taking this and making it part of their own project. So I think we'll see that happen more often. As far as other open source projects, I know that there are folks out there that probably will surprise us, but I don't have like a list of like 10 open source projects that have adopted it. But I'm pretty sure that we'll see more people, especially as we go into RC and that sort of thing. Like if I was running an open source project, I don't think I would, evaluate it on the alpha, right? Like probably once we get GA and have artifacts, that's when people will start increasing their frequency of making that decision to go from Elasticsearch to OpenSearch.
Sounds good. So I think you mentioned before that one of the earliest decisions that AWS, at least in the internal discussions, made was that it's not, AWS doesn't want to own this open source, but rather open it as a community. And I think this is a very important statement. I can testify as Logs.io, a member of Logs.io, that we've been collaborating, our people and our contributors have been collaborating to on the testing that you mentioned and on issues and so on. But looking at broadly, and there's a very active discussion there on the community about what's the path forward and about governance, and maybe later on also having that as part of one of the foundations, Apache Foundation or CNCF or others. I'm curious, can you share with us what's AWS's take on these moves?
Yeah, AWS from the beginning, like the first blog post we wrote about this, we talked about like shared governance, and we want it to be something that is not just governed by the whims of one company. And I think that block tools have been burned by that in the past, right? You go to a project that's a benevolent dictatorship and they start going a different direction. I mean, you've seen things. I can give you countless examples. I don't want to call people out, but like I was just reading about one yesterday where it's basically said like, yeah, if you don't align with the organization, then we're just tough, right? It's not going to happen. That was behind it. So we didn't think that was right, so we're still aligning with that. We haven't changed our commitment to that. So as far as the pathway is concerned, it's difficult, not without lots of challenges. And there's this kind of principle at Amazon internally that, it's okay to be misunderstood for a while, right? And it's one of the principles. It's like, feel free to be misunderstood for long periods of time. And I think we're in that phase right now. And our priority right now is getting 1.0 out. And the next kind of step we will look at is bringing people on as not only contributors, but people who can commit code, right? That's the next step. You could, it would be weird, but you couldn't say like, we're going to have governance without external contributors. Like that seems very weird to do. So if I was to think about this in phases, right? We're in phase 0 right now, where Amazon is working with contributors in the community, and we're the only people that approve the code. That's where we're at right now, just to be 100% honest with you. The next phase will bring on the contributors. So people who are not Amazonians, don't work for AWS, can say, yes, this is code that can be committed directly into it, or they can commit directly into it. So they can prove PRs and that sort of thing. So at that point, then we have people who are not only Amazonians that are going towards this. Then after that's accomplished, we start thinking about how more firm definitions of how decisions are made and how code is committed, and how the roadmap is put together. And that's where we start getting into looking at some sort of governance model, right? And then after that, you start looking at, okay, you've got a governance model, you have an active community. Then we start thinking about, okay, where does this live long term, right? It's possible that people will go in and say, you know what, status quo is fine. I don't know. It's also possible that people will say this is something where it goes to a foundation, or a foundation is made. To us, we have to look at the preceding steps before we can make that decision, right? A lot of foundations will look at it and say, do you have a community of contributors from across many organizations? So it's not like we could jump the line and just say, okay, let's just make it insert foundation here, right? That would be putting the cart before the horse. So that's what we're looking at. Now, as far as timeline on this, I think it's going to be a while, right? I think the first thing you'll see, and this is something you'll start seeing some information about pretty soon, is how the path towards contributorship. There are things that we have to accomplish inside Amazon to make this happen. And that's been a surprise too. Amazon is like a fine Swiss watch, right? It's got like little gears that move back and forth and all these mechanisms. Effectively, we're taking a fine Swiss watch and saying, let's take it apart, add in something else to it, like maybe a calendar, and put it back together. You can do it, but it's going to be difficult and it's going to take some time. And so that's what we're working on right now. That's, I wouldn't say like next week you're going to see anything about it, but in the coming weeks, we're going to start talking about the very methodical process to get contributors, or not contributors, excuse me, committers. And so that will set us on the pathway towards what the long-term governance for this project is. But we haven't. I mean, we wrote it down in the first blog post that shared governance is where we want to go with it. So we stand behind that. We want to make sure that this is not just Amazon calling the shots, and if you don't agree with that's not something that we're interested in doing, and it was never the aim.
No, I think it's important news for the community to know that there is going to be a clear progression path and a way for people to go up the ladder. Of course, the people that are actively involved and contribute to have a clear path on how they can gain influence, how they become committers, become maintainers, and so on, and the reviewers, and many standard projects. As many standard projects go. So these are good news, and I know that also the meetups are going to go down a more open path. And I don't know, you want to say a few words about the format? Is it going to allow more collaboration about that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we're piloting a project this upcoming community meeting, which will be held on June 2nd, I believe, next Tuesday. You can find that on OpenSearch.org. We have a collaborative agenda where you can go in and take notes on it during the meeting. If you want to add something to it, we've enabled commenting on it, so you can comment on it, and we'll try to get the pathway in for that. We're using HackMD for that, so anybody can go in and contribute to that. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in our context.
That's cool. I see also we have a question from the community. I thought we talked about OpenDistro, but I think it's a good opportunity to clarify. Someone asked, how is OpenSearch setup working together with OpenDistro? Is there a path forward there? So I think we touched about it before, but maybe a good point to clarify.
Yeah, so one of the things we're working on right now is a FAQ about backwards compatibility. And in that, it'll outline specifically what you can do. But there's a path forward. And in fact, OpenSearch can have, you'll be able to basically have a mixed cluster with OpenDistro, and then you'll be able to just migrate pretty directly with that, or if you want to do a blue-green type of deployment. So we'll have more information on that coming soon. But it should be pretty straightforward. It should be equivalent to upgrading versions of Elasticsearch. You've done that before, so it'll be straightforward.
And in general, in terms of the vision for the plugins for OpenSearch, how is it going to be? Is that going to be part? You mentioned it's packaged on the beta, but going forward, what's is there going to be 100% compatibility? What's the vision on the plugin side?
Yeah, so the plugins, as far as like compatibility with the OpenDistro plugins, they should be the same. The thing that's being deprecated right now is all the plugins were namespaced _OpenDistro. That will probably change to _OpenSearch or _plugins. We haven't quite landed on what the new thing will be, but that won't happen until 2. So it should be a straightforward upgrade path.
Sounds good. So we're about to run out of time, unfortunately, because I have so many other questions that I wanted to ask you. But I think the most important question for our listeners is maybe if you can tell us how can people get involved in the project? Yeah,
absolutely. So first thing I'd say to do is go to our website, opensearch.org. On that website, you can get to the GitHub project, which you can see all of our projects. 2 pinned repositories there are OpenSearch and OpenSearch dashboards, and then you can see all the other plugins are beneath that. In every repo, we have a contributing document that outlines what you need to know to get contributing. The other thing I would say is look at our forums. Our forums are linked off of opensearch.org as well. Our forums are kind of the communication platform of choice at the moment, and that's the best place to talk to folks and see, figure out where you might fit in.
Sounds good. I can only summarize with a comment that I see here from one of our participants. Eric wrote that he predicted this years ago, and he thought it would be called Fantastic Search. So although he decided OpenSearch, I think it's still fantastic.
I know we're out of time. I do want to say that was our internal code name for it. Before we had a name, we called it Fantastic Search internally. So Eric, you are really accurate. We couldn't call it that.
Yeah. Sounds good, and really, I think it's a fantastic move as a community move and a community play, and really excited in seeing the RC hopefully even next week, and being able to start playing with RC1, and more importantly, having the people being able to now contribute to the roadmap, raising points, and getting involved, because the more, and this is where I approach everyone here on the listening to this podcast. If you are interested, especially if you have prior experience with Elasticsearch and Kibana and this ecosystem, and you want to make it better, it's up to us. So let's reach out and get involved. And this is the way to build a strong community and a strong open source that will benefit all of us together. Kyle, thank you very, very much for joining me today. That was a fascinating talk, and looking forward to some more good news.
Yeah, sure thing. My pleasure.
Thank you very much. And with that, I would like to go over to some news that I prepared, that I collected from the interesting updates today. The first one is about New Relic. New Relic acquired, if you remember, they acquired Pixie Labs just a few months ago, and following this acquisition, now New Relic decided to open source Pixie. And Pixie is a cloud-native in-cluster observability platform, so it's really exciting to have that as part of the CNCF. They're going to contribute it to the CNCF under Apache 2 license, so this is going to be a really exciting new open source available for observability. So do follow that. By the way, I propose AWS. Pixie is also going to offer open source to run on AWS. So just I propose if you're AWS ecosystem here. So that's one piece of interesting news item that I wanted to share with you. Another one is about KubeCon. We just had KubeCon EU Europe going, and there was a couple of lots of interesting talks. I think two interesting talks that I think are relatively relevant to the open observability side of things are one by Weaveworks, with a very interesting project that demoed. Let me just share that for the ones who are available. And I know it will be difficult. So anyway, a project that it's called KSpan, and essentially it can take events from Kubernetes and Kubernetes ecosystem and turn them into traces so that you can actually visualize your Kubernetes activity, whether the Kubernetes native processes like kproxy and so on, or your own pod events. So a very interesting open source project still in the works that essentially translate these listens on these events, the same events that you can get from kubectl events, but translates them into spans that can then be outlined in a chronological order or causality order in Jaeger or other projects. So very interesting. Another interesting talk on KubeCon was by Albert Teo, that discussed using trace data for monitoring and alerting of applications, not just for debugging. Very interesting again, because as distributed tracing is gaining momentum, people want to take it to the next level, and beyond the individual traces and being able to trace them, people want to zoom out and be able to see the sort of the aggregated view and the metrics, the performance on the service, or maybe in the service operation, the individual operation, and then following some anomalous behavior, then drill down to the specific traces. So a step back, if you like, from the individual trace. And this is something that is has been contributed recently, both on the open telemetry side of things, in the collector, to be able to calculate these metrics as part of the collection process, and then visualize that, query and visualize these metrics over Jaeger tracing. So a combination actually of contributions both on open telemetry and Jaeger, really worthwhile. Look for using trace data for monitoring and alerting on KubeCon EU. I think as we're about to run out of time, I'll wrap up here, and we can follow up with more interesting news on the next one. So just to summarize, I would like to thank everyone. I'd like to, of course, thank again Kyle, for joining me for this fascinating talk, and thanks everyone for tuning in to this episode of OpenObservability Talks. All the episodes are available on your favorite podcast app, so you're more than welcome to listen that, or on our YouTube channel if you prefer the video format of the stream. We typically stream the live streams the last Thursday of every month, streamed on Twitch and YouTube. So if you listen to the podcast but you want to join the next one live, do look us up on Twitch or YouTube. You can find all the details at openobservability.io on the website, or just follow us on Twitter at OpenObserve for updates, and of course to share your comments, suggestions, news bits, and again, we're more than happy to get more people from the community. If you have good topics that you'd like to discuss, reach out via these channels or directly to me at Horovitz, Horovits, and I'd be more than happy to get more ideas for chats, for episodes. And with that, thank you for listening. I'm Dotan Horovitz, and see you next month on the episode. Open Observability Talks. Thank you.